Hey everybody, welcome to QITV Season 2. We're in episode 6 now, and we're going to start our Taos Sewalong. Taos is this quilt behind me, which I think we can all agree is absolutely stunning. This is 102 inches square. The pattern gives you a 51 by 51 option and a 102 by 102 option. The difference between the two is on the 51 by 51, you're making this exact quilt, except all of these pieces are half the size. It's just smaller sizes. We're going to start out by making the Taos table runner. So it's basically, let's see here, this block right here. So it's this piece right here is what we're going to be making to make the table runner. And this is the most complex part of that quilt. If you can make this, you can make the quilt. You need, for the quilt, 4 different Creative Grids rulers. And those rulers are the 45 degree half square triangle, the 90 degree quarter square triangle, the triangle squared, and the perfect rectangle. So this ruler right here is how you make the triangle in a rectangle box, any size. So that is going to be these right here, is what you use that ruler for. This ruler right here, we're going to use to cut all of these elongated and not elongated diamond shapes. This ruler right here is what you use for these guys. Okay, fairly simple. We'll list those so that you know you can check your stash and see if you've got those rulers or not. We will check with you later on in the video. As always, a reminder, Creative Grids rulers come with this little piece of paper around the ruler, which includes directions on how to use the ruler, as well as a QR code, both on the directions and on the ruler itself, that you can scan, which will take you to a website and show you how to use the ruler. But I'm going to do that right now. So there you go. Okay, we have kits for the Taos quilt. We have kits in the 51-inch size and the 102-inch size. We'll probably go ahead and have some table runner kits for those of you who are interested in a table runner. We do not have those fabrics. Those fabrics were discontinued a couple years ago. So this quilt has been around for a little while. We're just coming up on it now because it is kind of it's one of your bucket list quilts. This is one that you'd be proud of doing. This is a complicated quilt. You're going to take some time doing this. This is not a quilt for a beginner. This is not a quilt for a confident beginner. This is a quilt for an intermediate, confident intermediate quilter minimum. It's not difficult, but you need to be skilled with your 1/4 inch seam. You need to be skilled in your cutting, and you need to be skilled with using rulers. We matched as closely as we could to the fabrics in there. Getting quantity in anything right now is difficult because of supply chain issues. Thank you, COVID. So that's what it is. Before you get started, so we're going to go ahead and start cutting. I've already pre-cut some pieces, but I do want to show you something. I didn't pre-cut this one. I do want to show you something that will make all the difference in how this quilt goes together for you. So this is best press number 2. This is a best press that is designed to make a much stiffer finish to your fabrics. Why does that matter? You're going to be working with a lot of bias. When you're working with bias, you do not want your fabric to stretch. Now, of course, we're working with batiks, so you'll have a little less of that to begin with. But hedging your bets and putting a little extra starch in this fabric so that you get a nice, clean finish to it is going to make the entire thing much, much easier for you to complete. So again, this is best press number 2. And while I say starch it, it's not actually a starch. Best press is not a starch. It's a starch alternative. Starch is actually a food product which attracts bugs. What was that stuff called? The spray starch. You got it in the can. I forget My grandmother used to use it. Anyway, you would get silverfish in your linen closet because it's food. Starch is food. You won't get it with this. This is a starch alternative. But it still gives you that nice finish. And the Best Press number 2 gives you an even stiffer finish, which is really, really important when you start stitching together all of these diamonds, if you want them to fit. Okay, so enough of that. We're going to get into cutting. I'm going to show you how to use these rulers to do a couple of the cuts that you have to do. And then I'm going to show you how to determine how to piece everything. So we'll come back in just a minute. I'm going to go ahead and cut strips out of this. You don't need to watch me do that. We'll come back in a minute and I will show you how to use the rulers. All right, so I have pre-cut everything that doesn't require the specialty rulers. And I have all that sitting over here. But I saved the ones for the specialty rulers for you guys so that we could demonstrate those. So very first ruler I'm going to use is going to be the triangle squared. Now in your pattern, it says TS, and then it also says on the front, they're the different rulers that we're using, and it's going to give you the abbreviation they're using for that ruler. So we're using our TS ruler, and it wants me to cut 4 of these. And I have a 3.5 inch strip. So all I do is line my 3.5 inch line up, and you'll see the top blunt edge of my ruler should be lined up at the top. And I'm just going to cut that. And now I should be able just to rotate this ruler and come right up here and cut my other 2. So that's my 4 of those. I did that double. If you're not confident doing 2 pieces of fabric at a time, then don't. So we're going to use this perfect rectangle ruler, and we're on the medium and dark bright teal. Cut 4 pair. And again, I'm just going to line this up with this side and my 3.5 inch side. And I'm going to cut. And then there's a tiny little divot gone here. So I'm also going to cut that, and that is actually going to help us line those up. So that's that one. And again, I should be able to turn this around. I hate wasting fabric, so the more I can line things up together, the better off we'll be. Okay. And again, I was cutting multiple layers of fabric there. If you're not confident doing that, cut them one at a time. Okay. The other thing you're going to do is a little odd. It shows on, which page does that show on? Right here. It shows on page 3 of the table runner pattern. I'm not sure what page it shows on the quilt pattern, but page 3 of the table runner pattern. All of these rectangles we've cut. We're going to cut these into diamonds, and we're going to use this ruler, the half square, 45-degree half square ruler to do it. And you're actually going to put this ruler upside down to do it. Normally you would use these grabby spots would be down, but she's got you doing it upside down. So what you do is you're going to line that up with the corner. So I've got my blunt edge and my bottom edge lined up in the corner. And I'm going to cut. Then I'm going to turn that like that, and I'm going to do it again. Lining up the blunt edge and the bottom edge, and trim. And that gives me my diamond. And you're going to do that to all of these rectangles in the teals, including the black. All of the rectangles are going to be cut like this. Let me do one of the longer sets for you, so you'll see it's exactly the same way. Okay, so I'm going to line this up in the corner, lining my blunt edges, and then I'll rotate that and do the same thing on the other side. You want them to be pointed in the right direction. Now, given that we're working with batiks, we could simply just turn them around and they'd be in the right angle. But if you were using a print fabric, it would be very, very important that you had them facing the right direction. I'll do one more for you. Like so. Turn it around. And like so. So that is really pretty easy, getting all your rectangles into diamonds. So I'm going to finish trimming up my rectangles into diamonds and we'll be right back. All right, so we're going to start piecing now, and we're piecing the very first thing. We're on page 2, and we're piecing our center block, and we're going to start with the block made with the triangle, square, and the perfect rectangle rulers. And I'm going to show you how you line these up. So one very important thing, and it's pointed out here in the pattern, is you want to make sure that of these blocks, your 2 colors land on the same side in all 4 of the blocks. And that's so that when you make your star, you don't have 2 side by side in the star. So anyway, lay them out ahead of time like I've done here. When you put this together, you're going to look to see that that little, remember when I said you wanted to cut off that little nub on the end there? That is how you line up on the bottom to make sure it's going to come out right. So you line that little nub that you cut off with the bottom end of the triangle. And that should make it just perfect to line up for you. In this fabric, I'm telling you, this was all treated with that Best Press number 2, and it is handling really, really well. Additionally, I do have a new needle in my machine, so anytime you're working with batiks, use a Microtex needle, size to match your thread. I'm using Aurifil 50 weight, so I have got an 80-12 Microtex needle in. It has better piercing power for batiks, and it doesn't leave as big of holes. And it will go through a Microtex needle. The point will get worn off of a Microtex needle. So replace your dollar needle. We have thousands of dollars in these sewing machines. Give it $1 every so often in a new needle so that you get the good results. Okay, then we're going to do the same thing with the other side. And now I can use my part that I just pressed. I now have a little dog ear. I can take my second piece, I can line it up with that dog ear. And you'll see that that bottom little nubbin lines up right there, and my dog ears line up. And that is what is going to make your piecing really precise. Make sure you're using your 1/4 inch foot, and make sure that you're pressing, not ironing. Get the seam open, set your hot iron on it, and be done. Don't do a lot of whoop, 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 because you'll distort your seams. Okay, so that was our first 4 for our center block. And now we're going to make, these are just putting squares together. You don't need to watch me do that. So I'm going to go ahead and make my checkerboard and then my 2 other blocks for my center, and then we'll put our center together. Okay, so I made my pieces. So this is a little piece you're going to put together with your squares. You had just the big squares that you cut of the background fabric, and then your 4 patch for the middle. So we're going to put that together in rows. So do 1 row, seams to one side, 1 row, seams to the other side, 1 row, seams to this side. And then all your seams are going to nest when you go to put this together. Make sure you have everything laid out so that there's a diagram in your pattern and it shows you how to lay it out so that you get this kind of chain that you'll notice going on through this whole block. So you want to make sure you always have these in the right order. Okay, I'm going to stitch these together and I'll be back. Okay, so here we go. We've got our block, our center block finished. And if you'll notice, if you got your piecing done well, that your center of your triangle, your cream triangle, is going to line up with the center seam of your checkerboard block. And you'll also have nice sharp points out here at the edges. And that is the beauty of these rulers. They really help make all of those little bitty things come out just right. Now we're going to move on to what is probably the more difficult of the blocks, and that's these angled diamonds that we're going to sew right in here. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take all these pieces that we've cut and I'm going to lay it out so that I know what's going where. So we have our 2 blocks laid out the way we're going to sew them together. And you'll note that they're in 3 rows. 1, 2, and 3. When you get them pieced, each of those rows are going to have intersections. So there's an intersection, there's an intersection. So there's only one intersection for each of the rows you're putting together. However, you've got to get these pieced with a really good 1/4 inch seam and pressed properly so that those intersections line up. So I'm going to show you how to do that, but let's get started sewing on these. They should literally line up exactly like that. So you see everything is, all the dog ears are off. You're not having to guess how to center those. And again, it's really important that you get your 1/4 inch seam in and that you're pressing properly. So I'm going to go ahead and press this. And because we use that ruler and cut carefully, you'll see how that's just lined up just perfectly. So let's get all of these put together in the rows, and then I will come back and I will show you how to make sure your seam intersections line up properly. All right, so I have got my rows put together, and now it's time to put my rows into a unit. Now, theoretically, if I have everything where it's supposed to be, if I line up the end of this with that, I should have the other end line up as well. And theoretically, I should have a good seam intersection right here. That's a theoretical thing. I'm going to tell you from personal experience, save yourself a heck of a lot of time, and go ahead and pin. All right, so I'm going to move this in here and I'm going to pin this together right at that 1/4 inch. And then I'm going to open this up and I'm going to make sure that my 2 points are right where they're supposed to be. And that'll just save you so much time if you just check it before you sew it. Then you won't be ripping them out. And you do want them to line up. Okay, so I'm going to go back in here on my 1/4 inch seam. Pull my pin out right before I get to that seam. And then I'm going to double check that that is right exactly where I want it to be. So I want those 2 points really sharp, pointed right at one another. Again, I'm going to press, set that seam in, and then I'm going to come over here and get my other piece. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing. So I'm going to line it up right where I think it should be. Then I'm going to take my pin. I'm going to come in right at that 1/4 inch seam. Use a ruler if you need to. I mean, I've done enough 1/4 inch seams, I kind of know where they're going to hit. And that's not right. So I'm just going to make my adjustments before I start stitching. That'll just save you so much time. Okay, that looks like that's going to be right. And if I had that pinned right, that's going to come out right, and it did not. So I had it pinned in the wrong place. So you'll see right there where that does not line up. And I'm going to rip it out. I'm going to do it again. because I don't want to make a quilt like that and not have it come out right. So I'm going to rip it out and I'm going to realign my pin and I'm going to try it again to make sure those seams line up. Make sure you take the time to do that. And yes, it's fussy, but you don't want to put this much time and energy and money into something and have it not come out as well as you possibly can get it to come out. So that is off. I'm going to come down quite a bit on that. Yep. I'm going to come down quite a bit on that. Okay, before I rip the rest of that seam out and finish it, I'm going to double check. And lo and behold, yep, that's exactly where I want it. So I'm going to go ahead and finish ripping the rest of that seam out, and I'll finish that seam. But you guys get the idea. You got to double check it. Pin it before you start. Make sure your seam intersections are where you want them to be. Check it before you press it. Rip it out and redo it until it's right. But for this kind of a quilt, you want to make sure you get as accurate as you possibly can. So I'm going to finish putting together my other three. Once I get the rest of this seam done, I'll have one whole one done. I'll finish putting together the rest of my three, and then I will be back to show you how to do the Y-seams to put this onto my center block. So we've already done one tutorial on Y-seams. This is no different. It is not difficult. Looky there. That's what happens when you take your time. All right, we'll be back when we have the other three pieced, and I'll show you how to do the Y-seams. So now we're at the point where we have the diamonds done, we got our center block done, we got our other diamonds done. Go ahead and arrange your diamonds so that you have the two different colorways opposing one another, with either your bright or your dark facing out on your teals. So make sure you have the same collection facing out and facing the inside of the block. Now, on your directions on page 4, there is a seam diagram. And on the seam diagram, she has you doing this seam first, this seam second, and then doing this seam. I'm going to advise that you not do that. The reason I'm going to advise that you not do that is because if you think about that, if I sew this seam, then this seam, then these two pieces are fixed and I have to try to make these seams match, and they're already fixed in place. So what I'm going to suggest you do is you sew this seam coming up, or these two together, and then inset this into that with your Y-seam. You're going to do a Y-seam either way you do it, but it makes more sense to put these two together knowing that you can line those seams up very easily just by putting your seams together like that, and then inset that. So let me show you how I did that. It's very easy. So I just matched my seams up. I'm 1/4 inch seam on there. And I'm going to stop 1/4 inch from the edge. And I'm using my foot to determine that. So the front leading edge of my foot is my 1/4 inch. I'm going to do a back stitch. And then I'm going to look here. I'm going to make sure that my seam lines up, which it does. I'm going to press this. And now I'm going to take my center block and I'm simply going to line it up. And I'm actually going to sew toward this. No, I'm not. I'm going to sew from the center because I know where I can stop. So I'm going to start a 1/4 inch away from my needle. I'm going to sew this out. Okay, and then all I have to do now is pivot the other way and sew out. So again, I'm going to line up here. I'm going to start at my 1/4 inch line away from that center. Make sure I'm there. And I'm going to sew out. And you will see that I have a nice seam in there. I pressed that so you'll see how nice and flat it lays. But that way I did not have to struggle with matching those seam allowances at the top. And there you go. So that's inset in there. And then my seam matches out here. So now all I have to do is do the same thing to the other end and it's done. So this, like I told you guys, is that whole section of this quilt. So you're going to make 8 of those to make this center portion of this quilt. And then you're going to do a variation of it out here to extend it. But once you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy. So that is it. All I have to do is, like I said, add my other 2 seams on this side, and then I've got this one done, and we'll get started on the next round so that we can make our quilt. So I hope that helped. I hope it made sense to you. I'm going to get going on this one and get this one finished, and I think I'll use this in the quilt. This will be my first one for the quilt. Okay, we have kits for this. We have the 102 by 102 size. We have got the 51 by 51 size. And if you want a table runner size, we can do that as well. We'll list the rulers that you need to do this. And I hope that you all take a chance and try something on your bucket list. Taos. It's a really nice quilt. See you next time.